All right. So, as of yesterday, the RPG simulator can now simulate um, full sequences like it used to. The logging is back. The log isn't great yet because I don't have state string display names set up yet. So when the parties are in these different states, I just see the number, which isn't super great. And some of the time, the party printout's a little redundant, showing you the same thing back to back because some of these states are just managing other, like they're flowing for other reasons and they're not actually that big. So like this is a small update here that is redundant to this one, for instance. But um, the other cool thing is the chasing and fleeing stuff works. So if we look here, that one they just fought it out to the end. But once in a while, one of the parties will flee, and then it becomes a chase sequence, and the speeds get calculated. So here, party 0 got away. So neither party ends up dead. Both parties exit the encounter, right? So we have these different kinds of outcomes that are basically these final states that can occur uh, that end the simulation, and then there are these intermediate states that describe the simulation. So that's all up and working, and the brain system can now be scripted up so I can create bot brains that decide how to make these decisions. Well, I can make a bot brain. Let me show you what I've got. The There's this brain called the default brain now, and everything just uses the default brain. I've sketched up the idea that there will be more brains, and that then some characters or parties will be controlled by something other than the default brain. But I haven't actually built all of that yet. However, before I go and continue expanding in this direction, which is a part of the goal, there's another thing I want to do, which is that a lot of stuff is just Cruft is getting out of hand on a lot of fronts. And today's Friday, last day of the week. Usually, a great day for doing cleanup. You know, Fridays, you don't want to get started on something new. You want to just leave stuff the way they are, but make them better so that you don't have to think and take on a new thought process. You know, Monday's a good day to break everything, and Friday's a good day to get everything working. So we're going to start that today, but in this particular case, I think there's so much cleanup that probably all week next week I'm going to try to keep myself on task doing cleanup and not chase down anything besides cleanup work, because there's actually tons of it to do, and none of it is necessarily listed out here as these are new feature to-dos, but cleanup to-dos are there's these are kind of all cleanup to-dos. And so I want to tackle some cleanup to-dos today. This is probably a cleanup to do as well. So I'm going to start tackling those and organizing a much larger cleanup, because there are lots of things that are getting slightly out of hand everywhere, and I don't want to fall behind on that. So nothing new, just going to kind of browse through code and critique and then plan and modify and iterate. With that, let's just start exploring here. So the thing that set this off was last time I was introducing tile probing. Let me get this set up just right. Okay, so last time I was setting up tile probing, and I felt like it was a sign that things were getting out of hand. Tile probing is this new way of getting information out of a tile proto. And then the way it works is if I'm looking at something like the combat rules here, and I have an event. So these are clauses is what I call them in the tile. So the run tile has a header. Each one can have a header clause. And then handlers. which are each written as a clause. And up until this tile here, a handler just had some kind of event check here, right? But this one wanted to be the same handler on two different events, and so it's like I don't want to duplicate the implementation, but I want to write them both down. And it was the first time I had two possible events. It's the first time I've got something where I have two events that both depend on a specific state that are both available, right? I've had tiles with multiple events, like something getting used, and other events like, you know, the holder taking damage or something. Or like rests also are events that have been shared with some of these. But then there's this feature that sometimes an event is conditional. It's only like this handler handles this event if we are also in this state. And there's only ever one such there's only ever one event handler clause in the tiles that had this feature before this one, and now there are these two different states. So I had to upgrade to a different way of testing whether or not there was a state here. I used to just, on the initial probe of the tile, I would read the tile header stuff, plus I'd see all the events that this tile can handle, and if any of them have a state, I would store that state in the tile proto. But now there can be multiple of them, and so I can't just store one in the tile proto. I would have to store multiple. But even if I did start storing multiple, I'd also need to know which event it applies to. The only way to know for sure at this point if a tile can do something is to run it and to see these clauses. And then when you see them, you can say whether you would or wouldn't do something. Now, this comes with a couple of big issues. One is executing anything through a tile script always involves this scan through its clauses and these function calls that do an extra check to figure out if we can do it. There's a maximum speed this can run at. I would like to be able to get to a point someday where executing these effects involves minimal cruft, so that you could just say, here's an array of the effects that apply right now. Each one's a function pointer, together with some, you know, context data about like what's the tile this references or the character this references. You know, the minimum stuff needed to actually just make a tile hook call, and then call directly to it and have it jump straight to like this moment, right? Like all of this was, and skipping over this and all of this is work that I did to discover what code to run. Now, and the ultimate version of that would be if I had instead just known that I could jump right here somehow. Now, something like that is roughly possible if I don't include this extra like state conditional thing. If we were just dealing with events, you could start imagining a new tile system might look like this. Right, so the idea is this is what would replace this. A tile proto would then become a data structure that allows for quickly describing the set of handlers that exist, or something like that. But there's another reason why I'm not excited about this, which is that I think the set of structures that I'm assuming are going to be relevant to the clause conditions are still too limited, right? I think that this if here wants to grow in complexity. That's what the hint is from this, because if I went down this path here, then this becomes even harder to figure out. Like, I now have to duplicate this code even harder because I'm bundling them in this way. I think the missing piece here has to be well, okay, I need to think of two different parts. There's one issue is setting up the clauses to be something you can jump into. That's why I want this as a separate function, not inside of an if. But there's also the data structure design of the tile proto that even allows it to contain the information implied by these calls. If I'm going to try to make compound event conditions make more sense, I need to first think about how far that can go. And in the old simulator, if I go to look at the original prototype, when did I use condition? So you see, I started to get to the point where I was seeing that tiles needed to be able to say things about when they could be executed that were fully complicated, right? So this is saying this tile can be used under this condition, and then it writes some code that evaluates whether this can be used. So we're no longer saying that we're going to figure out if something can be used based just on some fixed clause header information, but an entire block of code is now being used to condition this. And I don't think there's going to be any getting around that, because ultimately these conditions are going to want to be able to check anything. I'm going to be able to want to create things that say you may, administer first aid can be used if you have a first aid kit. That's just a hard-coded fact of how the tile logic works. If I want to, I can go and extend this to say there's such a thing as the event for a tile being used together with a tile. So you can be like, okay, you have to have this tile, but then there's like, okay, what if I want to say without that tile? What if I want to say that the number of that tile has to be within a certain bound based on another tile? What if I want to say that you have to be having a specific event in a specific state with a tile? There's so many ways that each of these combine. that it makes me start to wonder if all of these want to be so rich, why don't I start saying things like, okay, so this would be something like, so the upside here is the data structure is simple and it's flexible. Downsides here are one, we're going to want this fairly frequently. This is enough of a common case that it makes me want to say at least the event and state should be something you can specify. But then there's a second issue, which is, while this makes perfect sense in this case, when we go to run, we run into different problem. Which is when we have two of them that both want to do the same thing, we don't have any compositional, we don't have the ability to create conjunctions of those clause headers. I mean, we could always just have some way of saying one of these is the other one. Like we could say, but you see like the issue here. So what I want to say is there's only one thing that a tile does when it gets used. The issue is just that it's only possible for it to get used under certain conditions, and that's why it makes sense to separate that out as conditional code, except that I don't necessarily want to have to run everyone's condition code all the time to figure out what it is. But maybe that's what I should be thinking. Another option is that event states can be used in a list like this. So when this event happens in one of these states, right? It's just building conjunction into that one layer. That's still not going, I mean, we're still going to need the conditional for administer first aid case. What? What is the difference? Okay, the one thing that is really unfortunate here, I mean, ultimately there's going to have to be one like this, but let's just ditch the C constraint for a minute and think freely. The basic thing happening here is we've got a tile called attack. The basic properties are things like this. It's got move kind, action, attack. And then it just has some body that's like action, attack. Okay. So this is the phrasing where a tile splits the logic that determines when it can be used from how it gets used. If I wanted to go further, I might also say one thing I'm thinking about getting to is saying apply to target. And then it'll just use default targeting rules. So then some tiles will have targeting to override the default targeting rules. And so, targeting could be something like the default targeting rules are you can target an ally, or you can say you want to target an enemy, but you can't pick which one. In this game, you don't get to pick which enemy you're going to hit because part of the basic rule of the simulation is that it's telling a story, and when the fight happens, it's chaotic. You can make a strategy, but how things play out a little bit out of your control. It's a bundle of chaos, and then a special ability or a character might allow you to manipulate the situation to give you a better odds at hitting what you want, or to ensure you're hitting what you want, or to tweak the odds in your favor in other ways, right? So I have this concept of this asymmetric targeting. Maybe that's just a part of the complication. But by asymmetric targeting, I mean an ability. The rules of combat should be that a tile being used that requires a target that uses the default targeting rules allows you to pick an ally, or to just say you want to apply it to an enemy, but that's as much as you get to say, right? That's the default. That's the asymmetry. The other thing here is, I mean, there are definitely going to be things that don't involve having a target. So and then I'm imagining that the rules here are when you use a tile, if tile has a use clause, run that. Otherwise, if the tile has an apply to target clause, select a target. I don't necessarily need to limit this to combat if I do this way though. The whole thing where combat needs to be like there needs to be this fight context so that sending a hit is possible. That makes sense for the way things were working, but if I'm gonna be able to use it on an ally, then why should I not be able to use it when I'm out with an ally and not in combat, right? Um, Man, this is going to get so complicated if I go down this path. What's an example of something that doesn't have a target at all? Run. Okay, so here the idea is when you use it, you don't pick a target. Run just means you are running. And so you don't pick somebody. There's no direct object to this particular quick action. You just do it. Now, the reason that I want to filter these by state is really so that things like damage and speed can be defined locally, but I don't know if that makes sense, especially in the case of damage. I think damage might always want to be on the table, but speed might be exactly the kind of thing where it's like, hey, you need to be in a scenario where generating speed is part of the game. So maybe this is the only one that actually wants to have a condition so far in the set that I've got, right? This is going to be... use condition, and then that's going to be if player if speed is in play or something like that. So this would be different from this because it's not saying if you're in a particular state, this is why when it becomes possible, but rather it's asking if there is such a thing as increasing your speed right now, which currently isn't really a thing I can ask. But the point is, maybe this works. Maybe... what did I skip in terms of other facets of the... tiles that I've got so far? These maybe are just default targets. This would be target none. this is a conditional. So this is like use condition is um, you see the problem, right? If I have a concept called a use condition, then I can use that to preemptively check if something can be used. But if the use condition is going to say something like, once you've picked your target, we're going to test something off the target to see if you can use this. I think we want that separately because there's going to be use conditions that are like, you need to have this item first. And then there are going to be use conditions that are going to be like, the target needs to be known to test the condition. And so you would be able to say, hey, I'm going to use this, but then you'd look and see, hey, this target and this target and this target that you're looking at aren't going to work. They're all unallowed by the rule. So the possible targets are missing. And then if we're building a human usable interface, we could just say, hey, could you run a quick set of tests for me and tell me if I can target any of these? But an alternative is that the rules don't guide you away from trying. You target a party, and then you go, if the target sleep count is greater than 0, then +3 damage to target, right? And now it's just a part of the rule. It's not unallowed to be used, just doesn't succeed if they're not all asleep. Okay, okay. I think this is good. So now the question is, do I want to go this route first to upgrading the tile data structure? Um, this feels like it's going to take a while to once again rewrite things this way. The thing I really want to get to, though, is... Let's see, this has a use condition. So that'll work on this one. And we're saying, a part of what we're saying here is that we're saying that the attack action shouldn't be so contextually narrow. Right, it shouldn't require this fight state. And instead, dealing out damage should be a universally available thing. I think that that's actually right. I want to have encounters that are not combats, that are, puzzles and traps and um, packs and, all kinds of things, magical spells that could be doing damage to you. So I think that that was not the right structure to say that I need to be inside the context of a fight for attack to make sense. At the very least, it should not be required to be in the context of a fight for damage to make sense, and that's currently what's happening. So that I want to change. But the tile structuring issue is another piece. Like, this is kind of moving in a direction that looks more like a multiple function pointer table. And right now, I've kind of decomposed it down to a few events. So instead of having events and states everywhere, it's looking like I would just have use and apply, apply logic, targeting rules, decompose, and then a use condition that has to get run separately. If it's available, if it's present, before it marks itself as usable. But yeah, like the generalization of the targeting thing also means this would no longer matter. So I guess the other thing that comes into play here is this would be a redesign of the timing system. So I currently have things marked as actions, quick actions, attacks, and late attacks, and they're kind of orthogonal concepts in a way, although maybe not orthogonal, just linearly independent. The issue with this is it takes a combat system to interpret what late attack means and what attack means as move kinds. The combat system is giving them meaning. If I was going to start resolving moves without placing them inside the sort of phase system that I have for combat right now, I would instead want a generic way to say, given a set of moves, how can we say that some of them tend to happen later? What I've been thinking about doing is setting up a thing where all the moves get during a decision phase, right, where every character gets an opportunity to make moves simultaneously with the other characters, and each player then manages their set of characters. And once all the decisions get made, you have a set of moves that's going to happen. The way that's then being applied is they get sort of sectioned off. Maybe they all get applied at once. Maybe they get shuffled out until first our quick actions, and then our attacks, and then our late attacks, or whatever. And I'm thinking that instead of defining phases within the specific context of combat, it's going to make more sense to have a rule that just says, when we have a set of moves, here's a rule for defining how they get played out. And then that rule can include concepts of timing that can be incorporated into the tile. So for instance, we could say something like, we take all the moves, we shuffle them together, and then we have a way of modifying the moves after they've been put together to bias the order so that faster moves and faster characters tend to be going first, and slower moves and slower characters tend to be going later. And then the way that would work is you'd enter all these cards into the event deck. That's basically the moves that are going to get played out. They get shuffled, and each move is going to get played. And then a pass is done over it, maybe a couple of passes, that move tiles forward if they are fast and move them backwards if they are slow. And I think that there are ways that that could work so that, for instance, if I wanted something like Sleep Spores to be a late attack, but I don't have this method of timing anymore, well, I'll just make this a slow one. It'll have a -2 speed or something, right? So it'll tend to go towards the end of the list of moves. And the Sleep Spores will be characters with a 0 base speed, and then the human characters will have speeds. We'll use the speeds for running. We'll also use the speeds for this game of timing out when actions apply. And then if we want to, we can start just saying after each move gets applied, the effect of that state change of state applies immediately rather than these things being simultaneous. Or I could continue to apply simultaneous resolve, which I've already set up, and I could take all these speeds, and instead of shuffling them together, I just say that they all always happen exactly in specific speed order. The nice thing about it being random is that it gives you a strategic space where you can count on certain strategies being effective or not, but it does not lead to predictability. You still have variance about to deal with throughout the run, right? If you're playing this as a game and you want to not have it be just like perfectly solvable, then you want these sources of randomness. And if every character can have a different speed, then you can know the exact order that they will play their turns every time. And that might be a little too rigid and mechanical of a mechanic, you know, to get variety between runs. So then, following this plan, maybe I will put headers in with the tile definitions. I might go farther and just start reaching into the proto here and being like move kind equals right. I don't exactly know if that'll work, but something like that could be nice, because then I could get off of having to maintain these accessor functions and just let these things construct the data directly. This won't be a thing. Now we'll just define some clauses that can go on a tile. So an apply clause means, oh, and we want to be able to start saying things like proto target equals RPG target single. There'll be no fight context. You'll get the amount. You'll just ask for the target from the context. You'll do RPG character ink, tile ink, context target, RPG tile damage amount, right? You just increment the tile, damage tile by the amount. Damage then gets resolved in a separate pass after moves. Here's the X. Here's the plussing it to the target. I want to be able to replace speed, damage, actions, quick actions as tiles and just have something simpler. Or I might still call them tiles, but I want to. Well, I don't know. I want some kind of plan where things which are just being used as counters are grouped together for performance reasons, so that I can sort of zero them out instantaneously. And maybe what needs to happen is that these things which are called counters, once they exist in the game, are always just there but often ignored. Not sure. That would play into how run would work. Okay, so run. Move kind flag, quick action, proto, hidden, target self, clause, use condition, clause, apply. So we want to check something like I don't know, something like that. I'm not entirely convinced that I get that part yet. Character tile count, holder, RPG tile. So show me how much run I've got. Tile ink. Holder. Speed. Amount. Okay. Now I don't really want to rewrite all of them. But I want to sketch one thing that I'm missing here, which is like a status effect of some kind. Sleep is missing, for instance, because it's sitting over here. So let's sketch out more, just to keep making sure I'm accounting for all the features. Sleep is not a move, but it has a max of 1, and it does a discard at 0. If we're gathering moves, then this gets hit whenever we are looking at a character and we're saying, hey, I'm gathering moves. We look at all the tiles on that character, and if any of them have the ability to be used, they get added to the list of moves that can be used. But separately, if they have a gather moves clause, then this can explicitly add stuff in other ways. So for instance, if someone is asleep, gather moves can come along and say, each ally selected, grant move wake up. So the targeting is now figured out. You'll get to target any ally. But I kind of want to override the default rule now. Now, how do I express that? What the default rule is that if you can target a single character and it's an enemy, then you can't pick who you wake up. I guess I just keep that default rule. At some point, I'm going to want to be able to say that targeting allows you to pick a character, even if it's an enemy, as the target. So that might just be like a modified version of saying it's like single no fog of war or precise or something like that. Right. You can imagine I want like a hunter's mark is specifically a single precise. It can be used to hit exactly the enemy you want. Here's the spot where targeting would replace it, and then it's just a matter of, upon applying it, -1 sleep to target. That's it. So now we have a tile which can be used as a move because it has an apply function and has targeting rules, but it cannot be equipped. But it's granted during move gather by the sleep tile, right? That's how that all works. So it's not equipped, but it sets up itself in the move list, and so a tile implementing a move still makes sense and works. I think I would rather that be a quick action, though. Kind of an interesting thought. So we have the sleepy party up in the simulation right now. They only get woken up when they get hit. So these two guys got hit. You can see their health went down. Now they're awake. And then, let's see. Well, they must have woken up the other two characters, but then it looks like one of them got killed. This one and one of these got hit. I guess this one probably got hit, and this one is also awake now. So we have 6 HP versus 6 HP. Oof. Each side did 3 damage. So down to 2 and 2. 3 hearts each. 1 and 1. Oh, it's going to be a mutual KO ending. Cool. So, point is, if this was a quick action, the difference would be this party would have a little more advantage, because once the first two guys woke up, they would have been able to wake up these two and attack back on this turn, so they wouldn't still have 6 hearts here. So I want to just see that, I want to see that happen with the simulator real quick. So here, they're going into combat. Presumably, they woke up these guys, and they should have dealt 2 damage to the other party, and there it is, they did. So these two guys who are awake, they both got to use a quick action and an action. They woke up their party mates, and then they dealt damage, and so now it's 6 hearts versus 4, and then 3 versus 2, and then these guys win. They should win more often now with that change. Okay, very good. Let's see. So the real issue here, I think that I like this direction. I feel like the tiles have gotten too complicated with the set of clauses I'm using, and this new approach does simplify some things. What I'm ignoring, though, is holder rest. There's still clauses that are essentially just event handlers for generic events. So like if the holder rests, that's something I'm gonna have to define from a larger context outside the game. That's not just, a lot of these have to do with activating it as a move, but this is an effect that applies and hooks in passively, right? And these passive hooks are just always sitting there doing stuff. So So if I'm gonna, well, yeah, I gotta answer this question. What happens with stuff like this? Right, the heart doesn't actually, I think, okay. The heart is hidden from the main display because we manually show it with different interface and everything else, just because it's so primary to the simulation. And then this decremented is a event that might apply to this tile. So if this tile is held by someone, but then it's getting decremented, this goes off. And what it does is it applies, triggers event. It just triggers the holder damage event on the holder entity, right? That's the way this is set up. And then holder damage is hooked by the protected tile, which says you can have up to one of these. I feel like you should be allowed to have like up to 99 of these though. Discard at 0. You see, so this event comes with an assumption that there's a certain amount, and decremented events have that too. Right? It's like this is an event with a with parameter signature, and so is this. Now I think what I might want to switch to is saying something like, instead of this, which was written a while back and it's been sitting in my mind, so this has when the holder damage event is triggered, if that amount is greater than 0, so you're taking real damage, then we subtract 1 from the amount, or rather what we do here is we do prevent equals the min of the amount and this tile count. Then the amount is subtracted by the amount we prevent, and then separately, if the holder rests, which is not the first time we've talked about this event, if the holder rests, then you discard this completely, right? So some moves charge up, some status effects remove themselves. But these things that work like status effects, okay, I want to modify this now. So I had originally written it this way, so that the only thing that could hook a tile increment decrement was that tile itself, and if it wanted to be hooked by other things, it had to expose itself through an event. But I've decided against that kind of thing. So what I want to say is if something like this is what's going to go on. So when a holder tile decrement event happens, it means whoever's holding this tile has a tile with this type, which is being decremented, and so this is hooking it, and then this particular tile decrement events have the property that they come with an amount, which in this case, since we're talking about decrementing the heart, it's a damage amount. And this is cool, except it's not even quite what we want to do. What's actually happening here is we have a bunch of moves. We're going to apply them all. When we're done, we're going to increment damage along the way and apply it all at once at the end. Now, why are we doing it that way? Why not just decrease the hearts on the fly? Maybe for no reason. Maybe I don't want to be doing this plus damage amount thing, and I'd rather be doing just subtract hearts. So like attack. What would happen if attack just said its effect was tile deck the heart? I think that's just what is meant, right? Okay, this is the only place where I was pretending that's the way it would work. Let's just try this for now. And so then the new type of clause is tile increment and decrement on the holder for any tile, right? And then you can have other things like how does sleep itself work? Do I have that anywhere here? Yeah, sleep. It's not done. I see. So the sketch for sleep is missing some other clauses. So in holder, tile, decrement, heart, discard this. And then there's round begin. This sort of works. One thing that it doesn't work for, though, is if someone gets put asleep in the middle of a round of combat, this doesn't do anything. I think something that's missing from the whole game logic system is figuring out if a character is capable of performing the action, right? I can figure out if the action is allowed under a certain context, but there's a separate issue of saying, can you do this when you're asleep? And I don't know how I'm supposed to go about answering that. Like, one way I could do it is to say the default is that there are some rules, like you have to have HP above 0 and you have to have no sleep or paralysis or whatever. But what happens when I want to make an extension to the game rules that adds a new kind of incapacitation? Um, Maybe the point is, instead I need to be able to answer this, right? And something like paralysis would be like conscious check, 50% chance, or I don't know. I don't know what it would take, but yeah. For now, I'll just stick with what I've got. It's kind of working at Oh, turns out I had my mic off for a bit. Thanks for the heads up. Anyway, what I've been talking about is the probability that I'm not going to stick with this API being at this high of a level, and I'm going to need some kind of underlying data structure API, which I'm just speculating about how that might look. But for now, I'm going to keep it parallel to the one I have up there, so no handles. It's just exist count max init set inc deck. That's it. And the big difference is this is going to run off of tile IDs. This will be an optimized data structure that doesn't boil down to a bunch of entities, but we'll be able to pack this in and do these operations much faster. This layer just applies the hooks. So the issue then is that I'm passing tiles around as tile proto pointers instead of IDs, and I kind of want to try to get to a point where the whole language can be written without reference to tile pointer passing already at this level. But the place at which I have to make the change is going to be on the other side. So if I try to just change these functions, it's not going to do much. I need this to start returning the ID instead of a pointer. And so the ways that could work are, well, I think the easiest way for me to do that is just switch it over to being an ID and try to get all of the data handling to go a different way. But I think what's really going to happen is when I switch over to IDs with the tiles, I'm then going to want to make a way where whenever I have an ID system, I can always set up parallel array, and at least one parallel array to go with it, and they're going to kind of collapse into being the same thing. That's what I'm going to try to shoot for right next. Okay. 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 So, does that work? No. What did we miss? Proto from name. Wake up. Okay, did we not? How come that doesn't just init it and stick the name in there? Let's find out. Oh? Oh yeah, you're in main. You're down at the tile brain. How did you skip this? Okay. Oh, right. Right. You can't use these directly. You have to use the raw version. Which means ID ref raw, ID raw, RPG tile enum symbol. Then you save that as a pointer, and then tile proto init from reg data. I think that's the difference. Let's see this part. Let's try it this way. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna need a quick break. I'll be right back. So somewhere else, it's still possible to get an invalid ID later. How did this happen? Sim party, tile elements, tile ID, tile element. So where did the tile element tile IDs come from? Where did the proto elements get talked about? There. Okay. So I think maybe I should be taking a lunch break. I'm almost at 3 hours on this stream. And I have made some pretty good progress on this first step of pulling out the tile protos. I'm now able to reference all of my tiles by IDs apparently, and that's sort of up and running now. I think the next step here is I want to experiment, right? So this whole magic ID system, right? I haven't fixed the tile probing. That's still in play. I've gone ahead and done the split. Now I want to deal with magic IDs and the gather at arrays and all this because I'm pretty sure that I need to just collapse them so that it's always ID based and then always has an array to go with it, because I still end up wanting things like string names for these, and I still end up wanting to use the more complex data structures with ID handles anyways, so they both kind of want the best of both worlds, and I think I should just figure out a way to get all of that in one go. But I think I'm getting a little worked up from not eating properly, so I'm going to stop here, take a little break, and maybe we'll come back for another chill hour or so to experiment with, now that I've got this working off IDs, but I still want an array of tile protos, could I set up some way to avoid, really what I want to mess with more than anything else is not even this, can I do all this work without having to build this whole registration system? Or at least can I minimize how much I need that? If instead of putting IDs in, or putting things in through registration this way, I could find some way to use global variables, for instance, like to just initialize the data in place, that could be all that I actually need. You know what I mean? Like it could turn out that all I really need to do is take this initialization data, which this links together a specific ID with a specific script pointer and a display name. So I'm going to take that triplet and link them together as a struct in an array and then process that rather than running all these before main functions. Because this runs before main to queue this up here. And then simultaneously, this is running a before main. So there's just piles of these things. And just doing it as declared data that doesn't have to be built up at runtime would be an improvement, but it would add some limitations. So I want to see if the things I want to achieve can exist within those limitations, right? With that, I'm going to sign off for now, and I will be back maybe in an hour or two after some lunch to start toying with this idea. All right, see you in a bit.